The attorney's office smelled like old paper and central air turned up too high. I sat in a leather chair that was probably older than me, holding a cup of coffee I hadn't touched, watching a man named Gerald Whitmore flip through a folder like he had all the time in the world. My father had been dead for 11 days. Miss Calloway. He looked up over his reading glasses. Before we go through the standard items, there's something your father specifically asked me to address first. I nodded. My hands were folded in my lap the way my mother taught me to sit in church, present, still, not showing anything. Your father owned a property in western Montana. A cabin and the surrounding 42 acres held in a separate LLC since 2009. He slid a document across the desk. He left it to you. Solely to you. I looked at the paper. The address meant nothing to me. A county road number, a township I'd never heard of. I didn't know he had property in Montana, I said. Gerald Whitmore nodded slowly, like this wasn't a surprise to him. He anticipated you might say that. He reached into the folder and pulled out a sealed envelope with my name on it in my father's handwriting. That particular slant of the capital C in Cassie, I'd seen it on birthday cards my whole life. I didn't open it right there. I put it in my bag and finished the meeting and drove home and sat in the parking lot of my apartment complex for 40 minutes before I went inside. My brother called while I was sitting there. I let it go to voicemail. My brother's name is Derek. He's 4 years older than me, and he has always been the kind of person who makes you feel like you're slightly behind on something, some schedule or expectation that everyone else already knows about. He called again that evening, and this time I picked up. So, he said, Montana. You knew? I found out today. Same as you? I waited. Cass, that property is worth something, you know that, right? 40 acres in that part of the state with a structure on it? That's not nothing. Dad left it to me, I said. Gerald Whitmore made that pretty clear. I know what Whitmore said. He paused. I'm just saying, you've never even been to Montana. You don't know what's up there. Could be a falling down shack. Could be something worth real money. Before you make any decisions, you should let me handle the research. I know some people in real estate up there. We could get an appraisal, list it quietly, split whatever, Derek. I'm trying to help you. I know you are, I said. And I hung up. I opened my father's letter that night at the kitchen table with a glass of water I kept forgetting to drink. The handwriting was shakier than I remembered from the birthday cards. He'd been sick longer than he told any of us. Cassie, I know this is coming out of nowhere and I'm sorry for that. I should have told you about the cabin a long time ago. I kept meaning to, and then I kept not doing it, and now you're reading this, and I'm not there to explain it in person. Which I'm sorry for too. The cabin was where I went, to be honest. That probably doesn't make a lot of sense. Your mother and I, we loved each other, but I wasn't always easy to live with. You know that. When things got heavy, I needed somewhere to put it down for a while. I built that place with my own hands over 2 summers in my early 40s. Nobody helped me. I didn't tell anyone where it was for a long time. There's a room in the back that I kept locked. The key is taped to the inside back cover of the journal on the kitchen shelf. Please go there before you do anything with the property. Please go alone. I love you more than I knew how to say. Dad, I read it 3 times. Then I folded it back into the envelope and put it under my phone on the table, like I needed to keep it from floating away. I told Derek I needed a few weeks before making any decisions. He texted back within 4 minutes. Fine. Just don't let it sit too long. These things have carrying costs, and I put my phone face down on the counter and booked a flight to Missoula for the following Thursday. I didn't tell anyone else I was going. Not my mother, who had moved to Tucson 2 years after the divorce and called me on Sundays to talk about her garden. Not my best friend Jenna, who would have insisted on coming and made the whole thing louder than I needed it to be. I rented a car at the airport and drove 2.5 hours east on roads that got quieter and narrower the further I went, until the last 15 miles were gravel and my phone signal was one bar that kept disappearing. The property was at the end of a road that didn't have a name, just a number on a small green marker half hidden by overgrown brush. I almost missed it twice. When I came through the tree line and saw the cabin, I stopped the car and sat there for a moment. It was real. That was my first thought. I don't know what I expected. Something symbolic maybe, something that looked like grief or like a secret. But it was just a cabin. Wood siding gone silvery with weather, a covered porch with 2 chairs facing a meadow that rolled down toward a tree line of dark pines, a stone chimney, a hand-split woodpile stacked along the south wall, still neat and full, like he'd been planning to come back. I got out of the car and the silence was so complete I could hear my own footsteps on the gravel. The porch steps were solid. The door was locked, but the key from the letter worked. Inside it smelled like wood smoke and something faintly chemical, like linseed oil or varnish. One main room, kitchen and living together, a small bathroom, a bedroom. Everything clean and orderly, a wool blanket folded over the arm of a chair, a cast-iron skillet hanging on a hook, and on the kitchen shelf, between a stack of Field and Stream magazines and a small carved wooden bear, a journal with a dark green cover. I took it down. My hands weren't steady. Taped to the inside back cover was a small brass key. I stood there holding it for a long time before I went to find the locked room. It was at the back of the bedroom, behind what I thought was a closet door. It was a closet. There were clothes hanging on one side, his flannel shirts and a heavy canvas jacket, but behind those, another door. Plain wood, no different from any other door in the cabin except for the lock set into it. The brass key fit. I pushed it open and reached for a light switch inside the frame, and a single overhead light came on. It was a small room, maybe 10 by 12, no window, built-in shelves along 3 walls, floor to ceiling. And on those shelves, boxes, binders, folders with handwritten labels. A fireproof safe in the lower corner, and on the center shelf, at eye level, something that stopped me completely. Photographs, dozens of them, framed and unframed, arranged carefully. Me. Almost all of them were of me. My high school graduation. My college graduation, even though he hadn't come to that one. I'd been so hurt about it at the time. My first apartment. A photograph taken through the window of a coffee shop where I used to work, me behind the counter, laughing at something, unaware. A photo of me hiking somewhere, taken from a distance, that I didn't recognize and couldn't place. He had been there. He had been watching. I sat down on the floor right where I was and I didn't move for a long time. The binders were organized by year, going back to 2009, the year he bought the property, the year my parents' divorce was finalized, the year everything fell apart in the particular quiet way that things fall apart in families that don't make scenes. I started at the beginning. What I found was not what I was afraid I'd find. I think some part of me, some small animal part, had expected something dark. Something that would change what I knew about who he was. Instead, what I found was a record of worry. He had kept everything, every report card I brought home after 5th grade, duplicates he must have gotten from my mother, every school play program, newspaper clippings from my college town. Not about me specifically, just the town. Like he was trying to stay close to a place I was living. Printed email threads I'd sent him that he must have found worth keeping. Letters I'd written and some I'd started and never sent. Versions he couldn't have had unless I'd emailed drafts. And then I found the folder and understood. He had paid for therapy I didn't know about, not for himself. For me. My freshman year of college, when I was struggling in a way I had never told him directly, he had called the campus counseling center, explained that he was a parent who was worried about his daughter, asked what he could do from a distance, and ended up funding a full year of sessions for me through the center's anonymous donor program. I hadn't known. The therapist had never told me. I don't know if she even knew where the money came from. There was a letter in the folder from the counseling center thanking an anonymous donor. Clipped to it, in my father's handwriting, she sounded better by March, less tired. I was on the floor again. I don't remember sitting down. The safe required a combination, but he'd written it in the back of the journal, and next to it a note, the combination is your birthday. I know that's obvious. I used it anyway. Inside the safe, a second, more recent letter to me. A folder of documents, and, at the bottom, a small velvet bag containing my grandmother's ring, which I thought had been lost in the divorce, which my mother had looked for and never found, which I had quietly grieved for years. He had kept it for me. Not for himself, not for anyone else. He'd taken it before the lawyers got involved and kept it here, in this room, waiting. I opened the second letter. If you've made it this far, you've had a hard few hours. I'm sorry. I know that's not enough. The documents in this room are my records of the years after your mother and I separated. I want you to understand something, Cassie. I made a lot of mistakes. I was absent in ways I can't fully justify, but I was always watching. I know that sounds like something a person says in a movie, and you're allowed to be skeptical. The proof is in the binders. Here's what I need you to know. Derek knows about the cabin. Not what's in it, but that it exists. He found out 2 years ago when I needed someone to check on the property after a bad winter storm. I asked him not to tell you, and he didn't, which surprised me. But Cassie, he also asked me, twice, to put the property in both your names. I said no both times. I told him it was yours alone. He didn't take that well. I don't know what he'll do when he finds out the full contents of this room. I don't know if he'll be angry or hurt or just calculating. And I'm sorry that I'm not there to help you navigate it. Keep your grandmother's ring. Keep the cabin. You'll know what to do with the rest. Derek called while I was still in the cabin. I had been there for 6 hours. The light outside had gone orange and the pines across the meadow were casting long shadows. I was thinking, he said, before I could speak. I got some numbers from a broker I know in Kalispell. If the structure is in decent shape, we're looking at a strong sale even in the current market. You could clear a good amount, even after fees. I could fly out next week. We could walk it together. Derek, I said. I'm here right now. Silence. You're at the cabin. I flew in this morning. Another silence. Longer. You didn't tell me you were going. No, I said. I didn't. Cass. His voice shifted. Careful now. Measured. Listen. Whatever you found up there, whatever story Dad built in his head about, I'm your brother. I'm trying to look out for you. He wasn't always the person you wanted him to be. You know that. I said. I also know he asked you not to tell me about this place, and you didn't. He asked me to. And then you called me the same day I found out in the lawyer's office and tried to get me to let you handle it. My voice was steady. I was surprised by that. You knew what was here, Derek. You've known for 2 years, and your first call was about the real estate value. He didn't say anything. I'm not selling it, I said. I'm going to stay here for a few days. When I get back, we'll talk, but I need you to understand that this is not a negotiation. I ended the call and stood on the porch in the cooling evening air. A hawk was working the updraft above the meadow. The woodpile smelled like cedar. Somewhere in the distance, maybe 2 ridges over, I could hear water. My father had built this by himself, board by board, over 2 summers when he was trying to figure out how to carry the weight of his own life. And then he had filled a room in it with evidence of how much he loved me, in the only language he'd ever really spoken. Quiet, unglamorous, present in the ways you only notice years after the fact. I stayed 4 days. On the first day, I went through every binder, every folder, every document. I photographed the important ones with my phone for my own records. I found his journal, the green one from the shelf, and read 2 years of it, from 2018 to 2021, the years when his health was declining and he still hadn't told any of us. He wrote about the cabin with a kind of love I'd never heard in his speaking voice. He wrote about me in a way that made me understand he had spent more time thinking about who I was than I had ever known. On the second day I cleaned. I washed the dishes that didn't need washing. I swept the floors. I found a pair of his work gloves hanging on a nail by the door and put them on and split some wood from the rounds stacked at the side of the property, even though it was June and warm. I just needed to do something with my hands. On the third day, I drove to the nearest small town 23 miles away. A handful of streets, 1 hardware store, a diner, and had breakfast and called my mother. I didn't tell her about the room. I just told her I was in Montana, that Dad had left me a cabin, that I was spending a few days getting to know the place. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, he always loved the mountains. I never understood it, but he did. Mom, I said, did you know he funded therapy for me freshman year? Anonymously? A long pause. No, she said slowly. But that sounds like him. The version of him he could be when he was being his best self. That cracked something open in me that I'd been keeping carefully closed. I cried in a diner booth in a town I didn't know, and the woman who'd refilled my coffee pretended not to notice and refilled it again on her way back. And I was grateful for that. On the 4th day, I sat on the porch in the morning with actual coffee I'd made on his cast iron era stove, watching the meadow, and I made some decisions. I hired a property manager in Kalispell to handle the physical upkeep. I had a proper inspection done. The cabin was in remarkable shape, built to last by someone who had done the work right the first time. I set up a small fund from my own savings to cover the taxes and the manager's fees until I could figure out a more permanent arrangement. I did not call Derek back before I left Montana. I texted him, "I'll call you when I'm home. I need you to not push on this." He texted back, eventually, "Fine." When I got home, we had the conversation I told him we would have. I didn't accuse him of anything because I wasn't sure what he'd actually done wrong beyond being calculating. And I'd known he was calculating my whole life. I told him the cabin wasn't going to be sold. I told him I knew he'd been aware of it for 2 years. I told him that the contents of the cabin were private and they were going to stay that way. He pushed once. He said something about how Dad had always favored me, how it wasn't fair that an asset that size, and I held up my hand and I said, "He left you the house, Derek. He left me the cabin." Those were his choices to make and he made them. Derek sat back in his chair. He looked out the window. He looked like he was doing math in his head. "Fine," he said again. And this time I thought he might actually mean it. Here's what I know now, that I didn't know before I opened that letter in Gerald Whitmore's office. My father was not a simple person to love. He was not consistently present, not reliably warm, not the kind of father who makes it easy. I spent most of my 20s managing a low-level grief about that, the version of him I wanted that he couldn't quite be in the open. But grief gets complicated when you find the room. He built a place to be honest. He filled it with the ways he couldn't say out loud that he was paying attention. He held onto my grandmother's ring through a divorce and a decade and failing health because he knew I'd want it someday. He paid for therapy I needed when I was drowning and let me think I'd gotten it for free. Was that enough? I don't know. I'm still working out whether it was enough. There's a version of the story where I'm angry, where I say he should have just been present, should have just been there. That secret love from a distance isn't the same as the real thing. That version is also true. But there's another version where I look at the green journal and the binders and the photograph of me laughing behind a coffee counter, and I understand that some people only know how to love at a remove, that the love is still real, even when the expression of it is quiet and strange and locked behind a door you weren't supposed to find until after they were gone. I wear my grandmother's ring. I wear it on my right hand, not my left. It's not that kind of ring. It's a small oval opal set in yellow gold, something she picked out for herself in the 1960s. When I look at it, I think about her. And I think about my father putting it in a velvet bag in a fireproof safe in a locked room in a cabin he built with his own hands so that the lawyers and the divorce and the years couldn't take it from me. He was watching. He was always watching. He was always watching. And in the end, he made sure I'd know. I'm going back to the cabin in September. I'm going to stay for 2 weeks this time. I have a sleeping bag rated to 20 degrees and a new pair of boots, and I've been watching videos on how to properly maintain a wood-burning stove. Jenna is coming for the 2nd week. I finally told her everything, the whole story, sitting in her kitchen at midnight with cold takeout between us. She cried harder than I did, which is very much on brand for Jenna. She's never been good at other people's grief without wading straight into the middle of it, which is one of the reasons I love her. "Your dad sounds like he was a disaster," she said, wiping her eyes. "He was," I said, "but also kind of incredible." "Yeah," I said, "also that. The cabin will need some work over the years. The roof will need attention eventually, and the meadow will need clearing if I want to maintain the sightlines. These are not small things, but they are knowable things with knowable solutions, and there is something steadying about that right now. My father left me a place to put things down. I think that was the gift, more than the land or the structure or even the room. He left me the place where he had learned to breathe again, and he left me the instruction, finally, to go there alone. I intend to. I've been thinking about what it means to finally understand someone after they're already gone. There's a particular kind of grief in that. Not just losing the person, but losing the chance to tell them you get it now. You finally get it. My father wasn't easy. I'm not going to rewrite that because the ending turned out to be beautiful. He was absent in the ways that leave marks, the quiet ways, the ones you can't point to easily because nothing dramatic ever happened. He just wasn't there. And then one day I'm sitting on the floor of a locked room in a cabin I never knew existed, holding a photograph of myself laughing behind a coffee counter taken through a window, and I understand he was always there. Just never in a way I could see. That's the thing about cause and effect when it comes to people. We assume the effect has to be visible to be real. We assume love has to be loud to count. But Derek heard the same silence I did growing up, and he turned it into a calculation. What can I get? How fast? How much? I heard that same silence and I carried it as loss. And my father heard it too, probably louder than either of us, and he built a room. He built a room and filled it with evidence. Derek called me within hours of the will reading. That's what I keep coming back to. Not days later, not after some reflection, hours, the same day. He had known about that cabin for 2 years, and his first move was to get ahead of whatever I might find there. That's not grief. That's inventory. And the thing about that kind of behavior is it always reveals itself eventually, not through some dramatic confrontation, but through a phone call that comes too fast. A question about carrying costs before the funeral flowers have wilted. I don't think Derek is a villain. I think he learned somewhere along the way that he had to grab things before they disappeared, and that lesson calcified into reflex. That's sad in its own way. But understanding why someone does something doesn't mean you let them do it. What I found in that cabin required something from me that I wasn't expecting. It required me to hold 2 true things at the same time. That my father failed me in real ways, and that he loved me with everything he had. That takes a particular kind of mental honesty, the willingness to not collapse the story into something simpler just because simple would hurt less. The easy version is, he was a bad father. Full stop. The harder version is he was a complicated man who expressed love in ways I couldn't read until I had the key. I think about the therapy he funded without telling me. I was drowning that year. Genuinely drowning, and I never knew someone had thrown me a rope from a distance. He just wanted me to get better. He didn't need credit. He let me think I'd gotten help for free because he knew that if I knew it came from him, I'd have complicated feelings about it. He understood me well enough to know that. That's not nothing. That's actually everything. Jen asked me sitting in her kitchen at midnight whether I thought I'd be able to forgive him. I told her I wasn't sure forgiveness was exactly the right frame. Forgiveness implies a ledger, a debt, something owed and paid. What I felt in that cabin was something quieter than forgiveness. It was more like recognition. I finally recognized him, and there's a grief in that too, because recognition came 11 days after the funeral, but I have the ring. I have the cabin. I have September in Montana to look forward to, 2 weeks in a place he built with his own hands because he needed somewhere to be honest. I think I need that too. I think most of us do, a place to put things down, to stop managing the version of ourselves we present to the world, to just be whatever we actually are that day. He left me that. Whatever else he couldn't give me, he left me that.